It's not easy to dream when you've spent your whole life just trying to survive. My whole life, I've been the kind of person who put my feet on the ground before anything else. I've never been one to take risks. I've never traveled without planning. I've never asked for a raise without knowing exactly what to say. And most importantly, I've never allowed myself to dream too big. I think I grew up believing that certain things weren't for me. Being a business owner, for example. I thought that was for other people. People with connections, with education, with money saved since they were young. But time passed. I worked for over 30 years in a transportation company. I started as an assistant, carrying boxes, then I became a driver, then a fleet coordinator. I never lacked work, I never lacked responsibility, and even with a simple salary, I managed to raise my daughter, pay the basics, and reach retirement with my head held high. When I finally hung up my blue company shirt for the last time, I felt empty. I thought I would feel relief, but something else came. A kind of silence inside. A silent fear. What now? I thought. I didn't know who I was without work, without routine, without a badge hanging around my neck. It was then that, for the first time in my life, an old idea came back to me. What if I started my own business? Ever since I was young, I loved cooking. I learned it from my mother, who said food should have soul, not just flavor. For years, I cooked for my family and took lunches to work, which my colleagues praised. Some even said, if you sold that, I'd buy it easily. But I laughed. I never thought it was something that could become a business. Until then. I was 58 years old, retired, with some money saved, and more eager than ever to prove to myself that there was still time. So I made the decision. I sold my car. I withdrew most of my retirement savings. I did the math, projected my expenses in an old notebook, and started looking for a small place to rent. That's when I found a little door on the corner of the neighborhood. It was simple, but there were plenty of people. It was close to the school and the station, and it had an energy I can't explain. It seemed to beckon me. I called, made an appointment with the owner, and went to see it that same day. It was a bit run down, with old tiles and leaking plumbing. But I saw a beginning there. I signed a 6-month lease with cash in hand, and I started renovating. I painted the walls, replaced the counter, and installed a new hot plate. I did it all with the help of 2 friends from my days at work who supported me without charging anything. I spent nights planning the menu. I considered giving it a fancy name, but in the end, I wrote So Miguel's Snack Bar on a little wooden sign. It was all I needed. On the first day, I sold 12 snacks. On the second, 20. On the third, it rained and almost no one came in, but I kept going. I made flyers, promoted combos, and learned to post on Instagram with the help of my teenage neighbor. My daughter went to see it on the second Saturday. She arrived with her husband and 2 children. They walked in, looked around, and sat down. I served it with pride, even though my hands were sweating. She said it was delicious, but then commented, half laughing, "Wow, Dad, you're in this now? Do you think you've become an entrepreneur?" At the time, I laughed along, but that phrase stuck in my head. Did you get me into this now? Why did it feel wrong somehow? Why did it feel like I had no right to try? But I kept going. In the first 2 months, I managed to pay the rent, the groceries, and still had some spare change. I'd come home tired, smelling of fried food, but with a full heart. For the first time in my life, I felt like I owned something of my own. On Sundays, when we gathered as a family, I would share my progress, talk about the customers who praised the seasoning, the delivery drivers who became regulars. But I always felt my daughter looking at me with a certain skepticism, as if she didn't take it seriously, as if she hoped it was just a phase. And maybe I was also trying to convince myself that it would work, because deep down, I was afraid. Fear of being the last to believe and the first to break. But even though I was scared, I kept going. Because for the first time, I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to try to live something of my own. The problem with trying to fly is that the fall hurts so much more when you finally believed you could. If the diner's first month was filled with excitement, the next 3 were a succession of small scares that, together, turned into a disaster. At first, I still thought these were just the normal obstacles faced by beginners, but it soon became clear that this was more than just a stumble. It was a slow-motion fall. It all started when the landlord called me in for a chat. He said the 6-month lease I'd signed included a clause allowing for adjustments at any time, something I confess I hadn't paid attention to. "It's the market, Mr. Miguel," he said, as if the market had a heart. The rent had gone up almost 40%. I tried to negotiate, saying I was still figuring things out. He smiled and said he understood, but that there were other people interested. In the end, I had to accept. I paid the new amount with the little I had saved for emergencies. I felt cheated, but swallowed hard. I didn't want to give up so quickly. But at the same time, business began to dwindle. A popular fast food chain opened 3 blocks down the street from me. Half-priced meals, air conditioning, a playroom. I couldn't compete. I started seeing customers disappear. Some still came by to say hello, but they said, "I'll be back later." And they never did. I started opening earlier. I closed later. I added breakfast to the menu. I ran a promotion on pastels and juice. I tried partnering with a delivery app, but I barely made a profit after fees. At home, I started hiding my bills. The electricity was late, the gas leaked, and I improvised with the stove for a week. At the diner, the griddle broke, and I tried to fix it myself using a YouTube tutorial. I messed up. I burned a cable. I spent more than if I had called a technician. My daughter would call me sometimes and ask how things were going. I always said, "It's going well." I never had the courage to tell her that everything was falling apart. Until one day, I closed early and went to her house. I said I needed to talk. I sat on the couch and with a shaky voice asked to borrow some money. It wasn't much, just enough to cover the month's expenses. She was silent. Then she looked at her husband and said, "Dad, are you sure this is still worth pursuing?" That cut through me like a knife. Not because of the question itself, which was fair, but because of the tone, a mix of pity and judgment, as if I were playing businessman with my retirement. I left there saying I'd figure something out, and I tried. I worked twice as hard. I cut everything I could. I sold what little valuables remained in the house, an old TV, a microwave that was already weak. I sold my guitar, my companion for decades. When I went to deliver it to the buyer, he asked me, "Are you going to stop playing?" And I simply replied, "For now." The truth is, I had already stopped dreaming. Now I was just trying not to sink. At the end of September, an inspector showed up. He said my permit had expired. I swore it was still valid, but he showed me the paperwork. A notice. A fine. I was devastated. I tried to appeal, but the system is unforgiving. Not even for ordinary people. Not even for those who just wanted to try. After that, there was no turning back. My sales began to decline. I had to fire the assistant who helped me with the grilling. I went back to working alone. I slept at the counter sometimes because I didn't even have money for transportation. I started walking, even though my legs hurt. I took cold showers because the electricity bill was late. Until one day at the end of October, I closed the doors. I didn't advertise. I didn't post on social media. I just closed. I cried silently, leaning against the diner door, holding the key I had dreamed so much of having. That was it. I had failed. When I got home that night, the room was dark. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands that had worked for over 30 years, that had raised a daughter, that had served snacks with pride. Now they trembled. Empty. Bankruptcy hurts. But what hurt most was the silence. No one called. No one showed up. Not my daughter, not the neighbors. No one asked how I was doing. I didn't want money. I didn't want help. I just wanted someone to say, "You tried." And that's already beautiful. But nobody said. And that's when I started to doubt myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I never should have dreamed so big. Maybe my place really was in silence, in routine, in leave it alone. But at the same time, a part of me still refused to accept that it was all in vain. I still didn't know what. But something inside me wanted an answer. I wanted to give new meaning to that failure. It wasn't the end yet. But I had no idea what was coming next. There are words we never forget. They stick to our skin like scars. I'd been closing the diner for 3 weeks when my daughter messaged me in the family group. "Dinner here on Saturday, okay? Everyone confirmed?" She wrote that as if nothing had happened. As if my world hadn't silently collapsed. I almost didn't answer. I thought about pretending to be sick. I thought about saying I was going on a trip, anything. But some part of me, perhaps the proudest part, said go. Like someone staring into the mirror even with a swollen face. On Saturday, I put on the only decent dress shirt I still owned. I sprayed on some old stale perfume. I took 2 buses and walked the rest, even though the pain in my knee insisted on reminding me that I wasn't young anymore. I arrived and everyone was already there. My daughter, her husband, their children, my older sister, and 2 nephews. It was a typical evening, like so many others over the years. The table was full, laughter was rife, and beer was in the fridge. But I felt strange. Inside, I felt out of place, like I was an extra in a movie I was no longer a part of. I smiled slightly, but I couldn't engage in conversations. I felt small, like a mistake everyone was avoiding talking about, until the moment came that I will never forget. My sister, who was always more direct, asked, "And the diner, Miguel? How are things there?" Silence fell at the table. I swallowed hard. My daughter looked down at her plate. My brother-in-law pretended to whisper to his son. And then I answered, in the strongest voice I could muster. I closed it. No one said anything for a few seconds. No, oh, I'm sorry. No, it'll work out next time. Nothing. And that's when my daughter said it. Quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. It's just that there are people who weren't born to dream too big. The sentence fell like a shot, a punch, a slap in the chest. She didn't look at me. She continued to tossing the salad, as if it were just an observation, as if she were stating the obvious. I stood there, still, with a lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow. No one defended, no one disagreed. At that moment, I felt invisible, as if the attempt to do something different had turned me into a familiar shame, as if my failure were proof of a foretold error. An unspoken, "I told you so," but wide open in my eyes. I wanted to respond, to scream, to say everything that was stuck inside, but he didn't say anything. I remained silent. I got up shortly after, claiming exhaustion. I gave my grandson a kiss, a polite wave, and left. On the way home, I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and a shame I couldn't name. Shame for myself, shame for having believed, shame for having failed. But the further I walked that night, the more something else grew inside me. A spark, a small fire, aching, but alive. I got home, sat on the couch, and for the first time, I really cried. It wasn't a cry of defeat. It was a cry of anger, of exhaustion, of someone tired of being beaten in silence. And in that cry, something different was born. An idea. The next day, I woke up early. I grabbed an old notebook and started writing. I wrote names, addresses. I remembered people who ate at the cafeteria, who paid on credit, who smiled, who told stories. I remembered a young man from the community who always said, "Mr. Miguel, that snack of yours saved my day." I remembered a lady who told me about her unemployed grandson who wanted to work, but no one gave him a chance. A girl who sold sweets at the station said her dream was to have a little car. And I thought, if I fell, that's fine. But what if I could get up with someone else? I began visiting some of them, one by one. I talked, I listened. I asked them what they knew how to do, what they needed, what they dreamed of, even if they had forgotten what it was like to dream. I started gathering these people together, not in a salon, not in an office, but in my own backyard. I brought coffee, bread, paper, and pens. We talked about how to make some money with what we knew how to do. Some people did crafts. Others knew how to sew, cook, or cut hair. I had no more money, but I had time, and the will. By the 3rd week, the conversation circle had become a group. By the end of the month, the group had become a community effort. Everyone helped each other with what little they had. Someone designed a logo. Another helped with social media. I taught them what little I knew about accounting, sales, and menus. And there, among those futureless people, I saw a future. Mine, too. My daughter's words still hurt. But now she was something else. She was fuel. Not to prove anything to her, but to remind me to never again accept anyone telling me how far I can go. Not even the one I love the most. When life breaks you, sometimes the only way to move on is to rebuild something that isn't just yours. I never thought that one day I would sit in my backyard with 10 people from the community and, even without a penny in my pocket, feel like I was building something bigger than myself. But that's exactly what happened. It all started simply. I'd make coffee in a thermos, set out some old plastic stools I'd saved from the cafeteria, and wait. At first, there were only 2 or 3 neighbors who came more out of curiosity than desire. But I spoke to them respectfully. I listened. I jotted down ideas. I shared my mistakes. I said, I'm not an expert in anything. I just know that when we come together, it's less scary to try. And people stayed. Jorge, who made wooden chairs with his father when he was young, arrived. Anna, who made incredible cakes but didn't know how to sell them. Rafael, who was a barber but never had a job. And Taina, who made jewelry and sold it on the train. Each had a story of struggle, of failure, of abandonment. Each had heard at some point the phrase, "This isn't for you." So when I talked about my failure, about the shame, about being told by my own daughter that I was a failure, they didn't judge me. They understood. That became more than a wheel. It became a breath of hope. Over time, we began organizing workshops in our backyard. We used cardboard boxes as tables and sheets as room dividers. Someone lent us an extension cord and another brought a karaoke microphone, which we adapted as a speaker. Each person donated what they could: time, talent, or affection. Within 2 months, we had formed an informal support group of over 20 people. People helped each other however they could. We promoted each other's services online and in neighborhood groups. We began organizing simple Sunday markets in the square. Each person would set up their own makeshift stall. And to my surprise, it started to work. I saw in their eyes the same sparkle I felt in my first days at the diner. The difference? This time, I wasn't alone. Small partnerships began to emerge. A municipal school teacher offered to teach basic finance. A former advertising student came to teach logo design. Even a journalist from the local newspaper showed up and wrote a story about the backyard that became a company. And when the report came out, I cried again. But this time, with joy. Not because they were talking about me, but because they were looking at us, people who had always been invisible, who only appeared in statistics, people like me. The story went viral on the city's social media, and with it came the unexpected, a phone call. I was doing laundry when the phone rang. A polite, firm-voiced young woman introduced herself as the organizer of an event called the Community That Transforms Award. She said she'd seen our story in the newspaper and wanted to nominate me as an impactful community leader. I laughed. Nervously, I asked, "Miss, do you know that I'm not an NGO, nor a politician, nor the founder of anything?" And she replied, "We know, Miguel, but that's precisely why. Because you didn't wait for anyone to start. You did it with what you had. That's what transforms." I was speechless. I thanked him. I thought it was just a formality. But 2 weeks later, I received the official invitation. Big event, audience, stage, ceremony. I was paralyzed. I showed the invitation to the group in the backyard. Everyone was thrilled. They said it was well-deserved, that I had to go, that I represented everyone. But inside, I was trembling. Part of me still felt like that old man from the bankrupt diner. The one who was told by his daughter that he shouldn't have dreamed so big. The one who left dinner with a sinking heart. But another part, now stronger, reminded me. You got up, and you brought people with you. I started rehearsing a simple speech just to avoid freezing on stage. I didn't want to sound like anything more than I was. And I decided that if I was going to say something, I would mean it. Not to impress, but to thank. The day before the event, I slept poorly. I relived everything in my head. The day I closed the doors of the diner, the empty bus I took to leave, my daughter's words, the first meeting in the backyard, Anna's first sale at the fair. So much has changed in such a short time. But the most curious thing is that even without money, even without a store, even without official recognition, I never felt so rich. Because this time, what I was building wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. And deep down, I think that's what I always wanted. Some victories have no trophy. They have silence. They have teary eyes. They have forgiveness without words. The day of the event arrived with cloudy skies. Perhaps it was the universe's way of reminding me that no celebration is without its scars. I put on my best outfit, a carefully pressed light blue shirt and the same shoes I wore to my sister's 60th birthday. The venue was an elegant municipal theater. I'd never set foot there before. The walls were decorated with portraits of community leaders, photos of fairs, social projects, and initiatives in remote neighborhoods. It was beautiful, but intimidating. I stood there in the lobby, the invitation tucked into my pocket, feeling like maybe I had been called by mistake, until a girl from the organization recognized me and came to welcome me with a huge smile. "Mr. Miguel, it's an honor to have you here. Don't worry, today is your day." They led me to a reserved seat in the third row, facing the stage. The lights were on, and the music was soft. Beside me were other nominees, teachers, community leaders, young entrepreneurs. And then, like someone seeing a ghost from the past, I saw it. My daughter. She was there, standing on the side of the theater, holding a bag. Alone. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. But then she saw me, and smiled. A shy smile. Half embarrassed. Half excited. I approached, and before I could say anything, she said, "Dad, I read the article. People shared it in the children's school group. I didn't know about all this. I'm sorry. Really." I remained silent, not because I held a grudge, but because in that moment, I understood that some wounds can be healed with a look. She squeezed my hand and said, "I want to watch. Can I?" I nodded, and she sat in the back. A few minutes later, the event began. They called in incredible projects. One group brought water to riverside communities. Another taught adults to read and write through theater. I applauded loudly, with sincerity, until they announced the last category of the night, spontaneous community transformation. The presenter began talking about a simple retired man who, after losing everything, decided to start from scratch, not alone, but with others. They talked about the diner, the backyard, the markets, the chain that grew without funding, without an NGO, without official support, only with empathy. And then they said my name. "Here comes Mr. Miguel Batista, chosen as Social Entrepreneur of the Year." I don't know how to say what I felt at that moment. I know the lights blinded me for a second, and the applause swallowed me like a hug. I walked up slowly, trying to maintain my composure. I grabbed the microphone, took a deep breath, and said, "I didn't come here to teach you anything. Just to say thank you." For a long time, I thought failure was the end. But today, I understood that failure only destroys you if you're alone. I was lucky. I had people with me. Simple people, forgotten people, invisible people like me. And with them, I discovered that dreaming big isn't a privilege. It's resilience. I paused for a second. My voice broke. I looked at the audience, and I concluded, and if I'm here today, it's because one day someone called me a failure. And I had to fall to understand that the ground can also be a good place to plant something new. Thank you for teaching me what it means to not give up. Applause, standing ovation, not just from strangers, but from my daughter in the background, with tears streaming discreetly down her face. After the event, she came up to me and hugged me tightly, like she hadn't done in years. "I'm sorry for everything, Dad. I was scared of seeing you get hurt. But I said it the wrong way. You're not a failure. You never were." I didn't respond with words. I just returned the hug, and I whispered, "Now you understand. Sometimes we need to break down to show that we know how to rebuild ourselves." In the days that followed, my story spread. I was asked to give a talk at a school, to be interviewed on community radio, and even to help with projects in other neighborhoods. But none of it went to my head. The backyard is still active. Every week, we welcome more people. And when people ask me how I became an entrepreneur, I answer, I didn't become an entrepreneur. I became someone who got tired of waiting for permission to try to change their life. Today, at almost 60, I don't have a car, or a coffee shop, or a fat bank account. But I have something that cannot be measured. I have purpose. I have respect. And most importantly, I'm proud of who I've become. Because when the applause comes from those who once judged you, it's not just noise. They are healing.